The hammer rang against the anvil like a church bell calling the faithful, and Gideon Drake had been answering that call every morning for the past 6 years. Ever since Grace Emerson first rode into Medicine Bow, Wyoming, on a chestnut mare with a loose shoe and eyes the color of summer grass. It was May of 1878 when she arrived, dust clinging to her split riding skirt and a determined set to her jaw that told everyone in town she was not a woman to be trifled with. Gideon had been shoeing horses in his father's forge then, learning the trade that would become his livelihood after the old man passed 2 winters later. He remembered the exact moment Grace walked that mare into his shop, the way the sunlight caught the auburn in her hair, turning it to fire. She had been 20 years old, he 22, and neither of them had any idea how thoroughly their lives would become entwined around something as simple as horseshoes. "My mare needs shoeing," she had said, her voice clear and direct. No simpering, no batting of eyelashes. Just a statement of fact and an expectation of competent work. Gideon had nodded, wiping his hands on his leather apron. "I can do that for you, miss. Give me about an hour." "Grace," she had said. "Grace Emerson. My father and I just bought the old Henderson Ranch east of town. We will be breeding horses." That was how it started. Not with poetry or flowers or moonlight dances at the town social, but with iron and fire and the practical needs of a woman building a life in the Wyoming territory. Over the following months and years, Grace came to his forge regularly. Her father had died of pneumonia that first winter, leaving her the ranch and a burning determination to make it succeed on her own. The horses she bred needed regular care, and Gideon became the man she trusted with that work. He learned her patterns, her preferences, the way she liked the shoes shaped just so to account for the particular gait of each animal. He learned that she took her coffee black, that she had a fondness for peppermint sticks from the general store, that she could calculate breeding lines and bloodstock values in her head faster than most men could with paper and pencil. He learned that her laugh, rare as it was, sounded like music over water. What he never learned was how to tell her that he loved her. It was not for lack of wanting. Gideon wanted to tell her every single time she walked through the wide doors of his forge, leading whatever horse needed his attention. He wanted to tell her when she stayed to watch him work, asking intelligent questions about his craft. He wanted to tell her when she brought him lunch on particularly busy days, a simple kindness that meant more to him than she could possibly know. He wanted to tell her when autumn painted the mountains gold and red, when winter locked the town in snow and ice, when spring brought the first foals, and summer stretched long and warm across the high plains. But Gideon Drake was a quiet man, more comfortable with metal and fire than with words and feelings. His father had been the same way, a man of few words who expressed love through action rather than speech. Gideon had inherited that tendency, along with the broad shoulders and steady hands that made him an excellent blacksmith. He poured his feelings into his work instead, making sure every shoe he crafted for Grace's horses was perfect, that every nail was placed with precision, that every hoof was trimmed and balanced exactly right. Grace never seemed to notice that he took extra care with her horses, or if she did, she simply attributed it to professional pride. She treated him with friendly courtesy, paying promptly, sometimes lingering to talk about her plans for the ranch or asking his opinion on a new stallion she was considering purchasing. She never gave any indication that she saw him as anything more than the local blacksmith, a useful tradesman whose skills she relied upon. The town of Medicine Bow was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and there were plenty of people who noticed the way Gideon's face changed when Grace walked in. The way his hands became even more careful and deliberate when working on her horses. His closest friend, a wrangler named Thomas Webb, ribbed him about it regularly. "Just tell her," Thomas would say, usually over whiskey at the saloon on Saturday nights. "What is the worst that could happen?" Gideon could think of plenty of worst-case scenarios. She could laugh at him. She could be appalled. She could stop bringing her horses to him, could take her business to the smithy in Rawlins, 30 miles south. She could look at him with pity, that awful kindness people showed when they had to reject someone they felt sorry for. Any of those outcomes seemed unbearable. "She does not think of me that way," Gideon would reply, nursing his drink and avoiding Thomas's knowing look. "Have you asked her, given her any indication of your feelings?" "No." "Then how do you know what she thinks?" It was a fair question, but Gideon had no good answer for it. Fear was not rational, and his fear of losing even the small connection he had with Grace kept him silent year after year. The seasons turned. Grace's ranch prospered. She developed a reputation throughout Wyoming territory for breeding strong, intelligent horses with good temperaments. Buyers came from as far as Denver and Cheyenne to look at her stock. She hired a couple of ranch hands, older men who respected her authority and did good work. She expanded her pastures, improved her barn, and built a modest but comfortable house to replace the old Henderson place that had been falling apart. Through it all, Gideon shod her horses. He saw her at least twice a month, sometimes more during busy seasons. They fell into an easy rhythm, a comfortable familiarity that felt both precious and painful. He memorized everything about her, the way she always checked each hoof after he finished, not because she did not trust his work, but because she believed in knowing the condition of her animals. The way she pushed stray hair back from her face, leaving a smudge of dust on her cheek. The competent way she handled even the most spirited horses, firm but never cruel. The rare smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. He learned that she had been engaged once, back in Ohio before she and her father came west. The man had been unwilling to leave civilization for the territories, and Grace had been unwilling to give up her dream of ranching. She had broken the engagement and never looked back. Gideon heard this story from Martha Sullivan, who ran the boarding house and collected gossip the way some people collected stamps. He treasured the information, turning it over in his mind. Grace had chosen her independence over marriage once. Would she ever choose differently? The summer of 1884 brought changes to Medicine Bow. The railroad, which had given the town its existence and its name, expanded its operations. More people arrived, including a banker from Chicago named Preston Aldridge. He was handsome in a polished way that Gideon could never match, with smooth hands and expensive clothes, and the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to work hard for anything in life. Preston took an immediate interest in Grace and her ranch. He started calling on her, riding out to her property on a rented horse, bringing small gifts and making his intentions clear. The whole town watched with interest to see what Grace would do. Gideon watched too, his heart sinking a little more each time he saw Preston riding through town toward Grace's ranch. He had no claim on her, no right to be jealous, but jealousy did not care about rights or claims. It was a bitter companion, sitting heavy in his chest as he hammered metal into shape and wondered if he had waited too long, been too cautious, let the best thing in his life slip away through sheer cowardice. Thomas found him at the forge one evening, working late on a complicated order for the freight company. Gideon was hammering with more force than necessary, taking his frustration out on innocent iron. "You are going to ruin that," Thomas observed, leaning against the doorframe. "That is meant to be a wagon fitting, not a horseshoe." Gideon stopped, examining his work and realizing his friend was right. He had let his emotions affect his craftsmanship, something he never did. He thrust the piece back into the fire to reheat it, jaw tight. "I saw Aldridge riding out to the Emerson place again today," Thomas said conversationally. "Third time this week." "I know. You planning to do anything about it?" "What would I do? Challenge him to a duel?" Gideon laughed bitterly. "She is a free woman. She can entertain whatever suitors she chooses." "She can," Thomas agreed, "but she might choose differently if she knew she had other options." "I am not an option. Look at me, Thomas. I am a blacksmith. I smell like smoke and horses. My hands are scarred from burns and my back aches from bending over the anvil. What do I have to offer a woman like Grace Emerson?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, watching his friend. "You really do not see it, do you?" "See what?" "The way she looks at you when you are focused on your work. The way she finds excuses to stay and talk even after the work is done. The way she asks your opinion about things she certainly knows more about than you do. The way her whole face brightens when she walks in here and sees you." Gideon's hand stilled on the bellows. "You are imagining things." "Am I? When was the last time Grace asked anyone else to work on her horses? Old Martin over in Rawlins would do it cheaper, and she is not a woman who wastes money. But she comes here every time, has for 6 years now. Why do you think that is?" Hope was a dangerous thing, Gideon had learned. It made you vulnerable, set you up for disappointment. But Thomas's words planted a seed despite his best efforts to remain skeptical. "Even if what you say is true," Gideon said slowly, "she is still entertaining Preston Aldridge's courtship. That tells me everything I need to know about her interest in me." "Does it? Or is she simply accepting the attention of the only man who has had the courage to actually court her? You think she can read your mind, know what you have never said?" The words hit harder than Gideon wanted to admit. He turned back to his work, but Thomas's point lingered, working under his skin like a splinter. 3 days later, Grace came to the forge leading a gray stallion Gideon recognized as her newest acquisition. A magnificent animal with excellent conformation and a spirited disposition. The horse needed all 4 shoes replaced, which meant Grace would be there for a couple of hours at least. "Good morning, Gideon," she said, and there was something in her voice, a tightness he did not usually hear. "Morning, Grace. This is that stallion you bought from the ranch up in Sheridan, is it not?" "Yes, Storm. I am hoping he will improve my breeding lines considerably." She patted the horse's neck fondly. "But he needs your expertise first." Gideon took the lead rope, noting the quality of the animal. "He is a fine horse. You have a good eye." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I was hoping to talk with you, actually, after you finish with Storm." His heart jumped, though he kept his expression neutral. "Of course. It will take me a bit of time, though. He is spirited." "I know. I have time." She settled onto the bench near the forge, the one Gideon had built years ago specifically so she would have a comfortable place to sit during her visits, though he had never told her that. He began his work, talking to Storm in the low, calm voice he used with all animals. The stallion was indeed spirited but not mean, and with patience, Gideon got him to cooperate. As he worked, he was acutely aware of Grace watching him. Usually her presence was comfortable, natural. Today there was a tension in the air, an expectancy that made his hands want to tremble. He forced himself to focus on the work, to be methodical and careful. "Preston Aldridge has asked me to marry him," Grace said suddenly, her voice cutting through the rhythmic sound of Gideon's work. The rasp he was using on Storm's hoof slipped, scratching the animal slightly. Storm whinnied in protest, and Gideon apologized, gentling the horse before carefully resuming his work. His mind was reeling, but his hands continued their familiar tasks through sheer muscle memory. "I see," he managed to say. That is quite an honor. Is it? Grace's voice was odd, strained. He is offering me financial security, a position in society, children, everything a woman is supposed to want. Gideon swallowed hard, measuring Storm's hoof for the new shoe. Those are valuable things. They are. A pause. He is also offering me a move to Denver. He says a woman of my quality should not be wasting herself on ranch work, that I could sell the land and live like a proper lady. That got Gideon's attention. He looked up at her, really looked, and saw the distress in her eyes. He wants you to give up your ranch. He sees it as freeing me from unnecessary labor. Grace's hands were clasped tight in her lap. He does not understand that I do not want to be freed from it. The ranch is not a burden I am stuck with. It is what I chose, what I built. It is mine. Relief and anger warred in Gideon's chest. Relief that she was not immediately accepting. Anger that Aldridge would ask her to give up such a fundamental part of herself. He turned back to Storm, selecting the right shoe from his stock and beginning the process of heating and shaping it. What did you tell him? The question came out rougher than he intended. I told him I needed time to think about it. The shoe was hot enough. Gideon positioned it, checking the fit, making minute adjustments. The work was soothing, giving him something to do with his hands, a reason not to look at Grace while his emotions churned. You love him. The words escaped before he could stop them, before he could think better of asking. The silence that followed was heavy. Gideon kept his eyes on his work, nailing the shoe in place with steady strikes of his hammer. 1 nail, 2, 3, 4. Each one perfectly placed, holding the shoe secure. No, Grace said finally. I do not love him, but I am not certain love is something I will ever find. Perhaps practical considerations are enough. Something broke open in Gideon's chest, some dam he had been holding in place for 6 years. His hand stilled on Storm's hoof. The horse shifted slightly, sensing the change in energy. That would be a shame, he said quietly. Would it? There was a challenge in Grace's voice now. Why should I keep waiting for something that might never come? I am 26 years old, Gideon. Most women my age are already married with children. Perhaps I have been too independent, too particular. Perhaps I should accept what is being offered while I still can. Gideon finished with Storm's hoof and moved to the next one, but his movements were automatic now, his mind elsewhere. This was it, he realized. This was the moment. If he stayed silent now, Grace would likely marry Preston Aldridge. She would move to Denver, sell the ranch, and disappear from his life forever. And he would spend the rest of his days shoeing other people's horses and wondering what might have been if he had only found the courage to speak. He thought about his father, that quiet man who had expressed love through action. But sometimes, Gideon realized, actions were not enough. Sometimes words mattered. Sometimes you had to risk everything, put your heart on the line, face the possibility of rejection and loss because the alternative was a lifetime of regret. You should not settle, he said, his voice low but steady. You should not accept less than everything you want and deserve. Easy to say when you are not facing the prospect of a lonely future. Grace's voice had an edge to it now, frustration bleeding through. Gideon set down his tools and straightened, turning to face her fully for the first time since her announcement. His heart was pounding so hard he thought she must be able to hear it, but he held her gaze. I have spent 6 years shoeing your horses, he said. 6 years watching you build something remarkable, watching you succeed against every odd, watching you become the finest horse breeder in Wyoming territory. 6 years listening to you talk about your dreams and your plans and your challenges. 6 years treasuring every moment you spent in this forge because it meant I got to be near you. Grace's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. I know I am just a blacksmith, Gideon continued, the words coming faster now. 6 years of silence breaking like a flood. I know I cannot offer you the financial security or social position that Aldrich can. I know I am quiet and awkward and better with metal than with words, but I can offer you something he cannot. What is that? Grace's voice was barely a whisper. A partner who understands what your ranch means to you, because he has watched you pour your heart into it. Someone who knows the difference between your horses just by their gait, who knows you take your coffee black and hate wearing gloves even in winter, and can calculate breeding odds faster than anyone I have ever met. Someone who has loved you since the day you walked into this forge 6 years ago, and has been too much of a coward to say so until right now. When the thought of you marrying someone else and leaving Medicine Bow is more terrifying than the thought of you rejecting me. The forge was silent except for the crackling of the fire and Storm's occasional snuffle. Grace was staring at him with an expression Gideon could not read, and terror began to creep in. He had done it. He had finally said what he had been holding inside for years, and now there was no taking it back. 6 years, Grace said finally. You have loved me for 6 years and never said anything. I did not think I had the right. You are extraordinary, Grace. You could have anyone. Why would you choose a blacksmith? Grace stood up from the bench, and Gideon braced himself for whatever was coming. She crossed the space between them, stopping directly in front of him, close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her green eyes. You impossible man, she said, and there were tears on her cheeks now. Do you have any idea how many times I have come here hoping you would say something? Anything. I have been bringing my horses to you for 6 years when there are closer, cheaper smithies. I have stayed to watch you work, brought you lunch, asked your opinion on everything I could think of. I have been waiting, Gideon, waiting for some sign that you saw me as more than just another customer. It was Gideon's turn to stare in shock. You mean that? Yes, you frustrating man. Why do you think I have not married? I have had offers over the years. Preston is just the most recent. But I kept hoping that eventually you would say something, give me some indication that your feelings matched mine. When you never did, I started to think I was imagining things, that I was being foolish. I thought maybe it was time to be practical, to accept that what I wanted was not going to happen. What you wanted. Gideon could barely process what he was hearing. Grace laughed, a slightly watery sound. I wanted you, you stubborn blacksmith. I have wanted you for years. The joy that surged through Gideon was unlike anything he had ever felt. Without thinking, he reached for her, his scarred and calloused hands framing her face. She leaned into the touch, her own hands coming up to cover his. I am going to kiss you now, he said, giving her a chance to object. It is about time, she replied. The kiss was everything Gideon had never let himself imagine. Grace's lips were soft against his, her hands sliding from his to grip his shoulders, pulling him closer. He kissed her with 6 years of pent-up longing, with all the words he had never said and all the dreams he had never voiced. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said again, needing to say it now that he finally could. I love you so much, Grace Emerson. I love you too, she replied, and the smile on her face was radiant. Though I have to say, your timing could have been better. You might have said something before I had a marriage proposal to decline. I am sorry, Gideon said, though he was smiling too, unable to help it. I was afraid of losing what little I had of you, afraid I was not enough. You are more than enough. Grace's hands moved to his chest over his heart. You are exactly what I want. A partner who respects what I do, who sees me as an equal, who has proven over and over through his actions that he cares about me and what matters to me. That is worth more than all the money and social position in the world. Storm chose that moment to whinny impatiently, reminding them both that Gideon had only finished 2 of the stallion's 4 shoes. They broke apart laughing, and Gideon returned to his work with a lightness in his chest he had never felt before. As he worked on the remaining shoes, he and Grace really talked, about everything they had been holding back. She told him about the lonely nights at the ranch, wondering if she had made the wrong choices in life. He told her about the ache of seeing her and not being able to hold her to call her his. They made plans, tentative and hopeful, about what a future together might look like. "I will not give up my ranch," Grace said firmly. "I need you to understand that from the start. It is my life's work." "I would never ask you to," Gideon replied. "I know what it means to you. Besides, someone has to shoe all those horses, and I would rather it be me." "You could move out to the ranch," Grace suggested. "There is plenty of space to build a proper forge, and you would be closer to the work. You could still take other customers, expand your business even. Many of the ranchers around Medicine Bow would appreciate not having to bring their horses into town." The idea had merit, Gideon could see immediately. It would mean leaving the forge his father built, the shop in town that had been his whole world. But it would also mean being with Grace, building a life together, combining their skills and their dreams. "I would like that," he said, "though it will take time to set everything up properly." "We have time now," Grace said softly. "All the time in the world." When Storm was finally shod, all 4 feet properly fitted with new shoes, Gideon walked the horse and Grace out of the forge. It was mid-afternoon, the sun bright overhead, and Medicine Bow was going about its daily business. Thomas was across the street at the saloon and caught sight of them. The grin on his face when he saw how close Gideon and Grace were standing, the way Gideon's hand was resting on the small of her back, was knowing and delighted. "I should go tell Preston my decision," Grace said, though she did not sound eager about the prospect. "You want me to come with you?" Gideon asked. "No, this is something I need to do myself, but come to the ranch tonight. For dinner. We have 6 years of conversation to catch up on." "I will be there," Gideon promised. Grace mounted Storm with easy grace, settling into the saddle. She looked down at Gideon, and the happiness in her face made his breath catch. "I will see you tonight, Gideon Drake." "Tonight," he confirmed. He watched her ride out of town toward her ranch, his heart full to bursting. Thomas crossed the street to join him, clapping him on the shoulder. "You finally did it," Thomas said. "I finally did," Gideon agreed. And she loves me. She has loved me. "We have both been fools, but we are done being fools now." Thomas laughed. "Best news I've heard all year. This calls for a drink." "Later," Gideon said. "Right now I have work to do. If I am going to court Grace properly, I need to finish my outstanding orders and start planning how to move my operation out to her ranch. Court her properly. You have known her for 6 years. Which is exactly why I need to do this right," Gideon said firmly. "I want to build her something beautiful, show her what she means to me. I want everyone in this territory to know that Grace Emerson is spoken for, that she is loved and cherished and valued." "You are a good man, Gideon Drake," Thomas said seriously. "She is lucky to have you, and you are lucky to have her." Gideon could not argue with that. He was lucky, ridiculously so, in a way he was still struggling to fully believe. That evening he closed the forge early and went to the boarding house where he rented a room. He washed thoroughly, scrubbing away the smoke and soot, changing into his best clothes. They were still work clothes, sturdy and practical, but they were clean and well maintained. He stopped by the general store for flowers. A small bouquet of wildflowers the owner's daughter had picked that morning, and then he rode out to Grace's ranch. The Emerson place was a testament to Grace's hard work and determination. The house she had built was modest but well constructed, painted white with a wide porch that looked out over her pastures. The barn was large and well-maintained, designed to shelter her valuable breeding stock through Wyoming's harsh winters. Corrals and fences were all in good repair, and horses grazed peacefully in the fields, their coats gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Grace met him on the porch, wearing a dress instead of her usual split skirt and blouse. The dress was simple, a soft green that matched her eyes, and Gideon thought she had never looked more beautiful. "You brought flowers," she said, accepting the bouquet with a smile that made the ride out worthwhile. "I wanted to do this properly," Gideon said. "I know we already spoke this morning, but I want to court you correctly, Grace. I want to do things right." "Come inside," she said, taking his hand. "I made dinner." The inside of Grace's house was as practical and lovely as the woman herself. The main room served as kitchen and dining area, with a large table and chairs, a well-maintained stove and shelves lined with books. Gideon noticed volumes on horse breeding, ranch management, and veterinary care, but also poetry and novels. A door led to what he assumed was her bedroom, and another to a small office where she likely did her record-keeping. The meal was simple but delicious. Roasted chicken with vegetables from her garden, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. They talked through dinner, and it was easier now, without the weight of unspoken feelings between them. Grace told him about her plans for next year's breeding season, the bloodlines she wanted to cultivate. Gideon told her about his ideas for expanding his services, possibly taking on an apprentice. "I spoke with Preston this afternoon," Grace said as they were finishing the pie. "He did not take it well." Gideon tensed slightly. "What happened?" "He was insulted, I think. Could not understand why I would turn down his offer. When I told him I had feelings for someone else, he asked who. When I told him it was you, he laughed." Anger flickered in Gideon's chest, but Grace reached across the table to take his hand. "Let him laugh," she said. "His opinion means nothing to me. He is a man who wanted me to give up everything that makes me who I am. That is not love, Gideon. What you and I have, what we have been building even without knowing it these past 6 years, that is real. I will never ask you to be anything other than who you are," Gideon said seriously. "I love you because of who you are, not despite it." "I know," Grace said softly. "That is why I love you." They talked long into the evening until the stars were bright overhead and the night had grown cool. Finally, reluctantly, Gideon said he should head back to town. Grace walked him out to where his horse was tied. "When will I see you again?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Gideon said immediately. "And the day after that, and the day after that. I have wasted enough time, Grace. I do not intend to waste any more." He kissed her good night, gentle and sweet, a promise of all the kisses to come. Then he rode back to Medicine Bow under the stars, feeling like the luckiest man in Wyoming territory. The next weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Gideon continued his work in town while beginning preparations to move his operation to Grace's ranch. He courted her properly, riding out every evening he could spare, bringing small gifts and spending long hours talking and learning each other in this new way. The whole town knew about them within days, and the general consensus was that it was about time. There was one unpleasant incident when Preston Aldridge confronted Gideon in the street, making snide comments about blacksmiths overreaching their station. Gideon, mindful of his promise to Grace that he would not cause trouble, simply said that Grace had made her choice and it would be best if Preston respected it. Thomas, who had been nearby, added his own persuasive presence and Preston backed down, though the resentment in his eyes was clear. "He will be trouble," Thomas predicted. "He will get over it," Gideon replied, hoping he was right. Mostly, Preston was just an annoyance. What mattered was Grace and the life they were beginning to build together. Gideon had never been so happy. After years of quiet longing, he could finally touch her, kiss her, tell her he loved her whenever he wanted. Grace bloomed under the attention, the happiness in her evident to everyone who saw her. 3 months after that fateful conversation in the forge, Gideon proposed properly. He had been working on something special, using all his skill as a blacksmith to create a ring unlike any other. It was forged iron, shaped into a delicate band inlaid with silver in a pattern that resembled flowing water or wind. It was not gold or diamonds, nothing a banker like Preston Aldridge would have offered, but it was made with his own hands, crafted with love and care and all his skill. He proposed at sunset on her ranch, with the mountains purple in the distance and her horses grazing peacefully nearby. He went down on one knee in the grass, holding out the ring he had made. "Grace Emerson," he said, "I have loved you since the day we met. You are the strongest, most capable, most beautiful woman I have ever known. I want to spend the rest of my life building dreams with you, shoeing your horses and being your partner in everything. Will you marry me?" Grace was crying, tears streaming down her face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as he had known it would. He had spent hours getting the size exactly right. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him, and Gideon thought his heart might burst from joy. They were married 6 weeks later, in October of 1884, in a simple ceremony at Medicine Bow's small church. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and Gideon wore a new suit that Thomas had helped him pick out in Rawlins. The whole town turned out for the celebration, and the party lasted well into the night. The one shadow on the day was Preston Aldridge's absence. He had left Medicine Bow 2 weeks earlier, returning to Denver, but not before making some bitter comments about Grace throwing her life away on a common laborer. Grace had ignored the comments with the dignity that was characteristic of her, and Gideon tried to do the same, though the words stung more than he wanted to admit. But on his wedding day, with Grace's hand in his and their friends and neighbors celebrating around them, Gideon could not bring himself to care what Preston Aldridge thought. This was everything he had ever wanted, more than he had ever dared to dream. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment, but a happy one. Gideon moved his forge operation out to the ranch, building a new shop with Grace's input. It was larger than his old forge, better equipped, and positioned perfectly to serve the ranching community around Medicine Bow. His business actually expanded, just as Grace had predicted, as ranchers found it convenient to bring their horses to him. He and Grace fell into rhythms, learning to live together, to work together. She taught him about horse breeding and bloodlines, and he taught her more about the intricacies of metalworking. They discovered each other's quirks and habits, the small intimacies of married life. Gideon learned that Grace talked in her sleep sometimes, rambling about horses and breeding percentages. Grace learned that Gideon woke before dawn every morning, unable to sleep past first light. They had their disagreements, of course. Grace could be stubborn about her ideas for the ranch, and Gideon could be inflexible about his methods in the forge. But they learned to talk things through, to compromise, to respect each other's expertise. The foundation of friendship they had built over 6 years of shoeing horses served them well, giving them a base of understanding and respect that made the challenges of marriage easier to navigate. By their first anniversary, the ranch was more prosperous than ever. Grace's reputation as a breeder continued to grow, and Gideon's forge was busy from dawn to dusk. They hired another ranch hand and Gideon took on an apprentice, a young man named Jacob who showed real promise with metalwork. The one thing missing was children. They both wanted them, had talked about it, but the first year passed without Grace conceiving. She tried not to worry, knowing that these things sometimes took time, but Gideon could see the disappointment in her eyes each month. "It will happen," he told her, holding her close. "We have time." "I am 27 now," Grace said, "not getting any younger." "My mother did not have her first child until she was 29, Gideon reminded her. "And she went on to have 3 more. We will have our family, Grace, I know it." His certainty comforted her, and they continued to build their life together, trusting that children would come when the time was right. The spring of 1886 brought unexpected trouble. A late blizzard hit Wyoming territory in April, unusual even for the unpredictable mountain weather. Gideon and Grace worked around the clock to protect the horses, getting them all into the barn and making sure they had enough feed and water. The storm lasted 3 days, dumping snow and bringing temperatures down to dangerous levels. When the storm finally cleared, they discovered that several of their fences had been damaged by the weight of the snow and the wind. More concerning, some of the horses had gotten spooked during the worst of the storm and injured themselves. Nothing serious but requiring care and attention. Gideon worked long hours repairing fences and shoeing horses who had thrown shoes or damaged their hooves during the chaos. Grace was busy with the injured animals, her veterinary skills put to the test. They barely slept, passing each other with quick kisses and murmured encouragement as they dealt with crisis after crisis. It was during this exhausting time that Thomas rode out to the ranch with concerning news. Preston Aldridge was back in Medicine Bow, and he had been asking questions about the Emerson ranch, about its profitability and land value. "Why would he be doing that?" Grace asked, weariness making her voice sharp. Thomas shook his head. "Nothing good, I would wager. Word is he made some bad investments in Denver, lost a lot of money. He is looking for opportunities to rebuild his fortune." Gideon felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lingering cold from the blizzard. "He cannot have this ranch. It is Grace's, legally and morally." "I know that," Thomas said. "But you know how these banker types can be. They find angles, loopholes. Just thought you should know he is sniffing around." After Thomas left, Gideon found Grace in the barn, checking on one of the mares who had cut her leg during the storm. He told her what Thomas had said and saw the worry flash across her face. "This ranch is mine," she said fiercely. "My father and I bought it with money we saved for years. I have the deed, the papers, everything legal and proper. Preston Aldridge cannot touch it." "I know," Gideon said soothingly, "but we should be careful. Maybe talk to a lawyer in Rawlins, make sure everything is properly documented and protected." Grace nodded slowly. "You are right. I will ride to Rawlins tomorrow, speak with Mr. Henderson. He handled the original purchase of the ranch. He can help ensure everything is secure." But before Grace could make the trip to Rawlins, Preston made his move. He showed up at the ranch 2 days later, riding up to the house with the confidence of a man who thought he had the upper hand. Gideon was in the forge when he saw Preston arrive, and he immediately set aside his work and headed for the house. He arrived to find Preston and Grace on the porch, their voices raised in argument. "You are talking nonsense," Grace was saying, her face flushed with anger. "I own this land free and clear. You have no claim to any of it." "Ah, but that is where you are wrong," Preston said smoothly. "You see, when I was courting you, you may recall I made you a small loan, $500, to help with some ranch improvements. You signed a promissory note." Gideon's stomach dropped. He saw the moment Grace remembered, the way her face paled slightly. "That was not a loan," she said. "You said it was a gift, an investment in the ranch." "Did I? How strange that you would think that. The promissory note you signed is quite clear. It states the money was a loan, due to be repaid within 2 years. With interest, of course. Preston's smile was cold. That 2-year period is almost up, Mrs. Drake. And unless you can repay the full amount, which I calculate to be approximately $650 with interest, I am entitled to seize assets equal to that value. You cannot do that, Gideon said, stepping forward. This is extortion. This is business, Preston corrected. Legal business, backed by a signed document. I have already spoken with the territorial judge. He has reviewed the promissory note and agreed that it is legitimate. Grace's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. I do not have that much cash on hand right now. The ranch makes money, but I have invested most of it back into the operation. I would need time to sell some horses to gather the funds. Time, Preston said thoughtfully. Yes, I suppose I could give you time. Shall we say 30 days? If you cannot repay the loan in full within 30 days, I will be forced to take legal action to claim what is owed to me. And Mrs. Drake, I should mention that according to the promissory note, I am entitled to claim land as payment. Good grazing land. I am thinking those eastern pastures would do nicely. He tipped his hat mockingly and rode away, leaving Gideon and Grace standing on the porch in stunned silence. How could I have been so stupid? Grace said, her voice breaking. I signed without reading it carefully. He gave me the money when I was planning to expand the barn, said it was to show his good faith as a potential investor. I believed him when he said there were no strings attached. Gideon pulled her into his arms, feeling her trembling. This is not your fault. He deceived you deliberately. We will fight this. How? If the judge has already reviewed the note and deemed it legitimate if I really did sign it, then legally he may have a claim. Grace pulled back, wiping at her eyes angrily. Those eastern pastures, Gideon. That is some of the best grazing land on the ranch. Losing it would significantly impact the operation, and it would give him a foothold, a claim to part of the property. He could use it to cause more trouble later. Then we will not let him have it, Gideon said firmly. We will find the money to repay the loan. We have 30 days. Grace shook her head. Where? We do not have that kind of cash. I could sell some horses, but getting the right price takes time, especially for the breeding stock. If I sell too quickly, I will have to accept less than they are worth, which defeats the purpose. Then we will find another way, Gideon insisted. We will borrow the money, or I will take on extra work or something. I am not letting Preston Aldridge take any part of this ranch from you, Grace. Not after everything you have built. That night, they sat at their kitchen table and went over every option they could think of. Grace could potentially get a loan from a bank, but banks were notoriously reluctant to lend to women, even married women with prosperous businesses. Gideon could try to borrow money based on his business, but his forge, while successful, did not generate the kind of cash flow that would justify a $600 loan. They could sell horses, but as Grace had pointed out, getting fair value would take time they did not have. They could sell other assets, but most of their wealth was tied up in the land and the livestock. They could ask friends for help, but none of their neighbors had that kind of money sitting around either. Ranch life was profitable in the long term but rarely generated large amounts of liquid capital. What about your work in town? Grace asked. You still own the building where your old forge was. You could sell it. Gideon had thought of that. The building was worth something, but probably not enough. Maybe $200 or $300 at most. It is not in the best condition and the location is not prime. It would help, but it would not solve the problem. They talked in circles for hours, exhaustion and worry making them both short-tempered. Finally, well after midnight, they gave up and went to bed, holding each other in the darkness. We will figure it out, Gideon said into Grace's hair. I promise you, we will find a way. The next morning, Gideon rode into town to talk to Thomas and some of the other men he knew, trying to brainstorm solutions. Grace, meanwhile, started making plans to sell some of her younger horses, the ones that would bring in cash quickest even if the price was not ideal. It was Martha Sullivan, the boarding house owner and town gossip, who inadvertently provided the solution. She stopped Gideon on the street as he was heading to the general store. "I heard about your trouble with that awful Preston Aldridge," she said, her voice full of sympathy. "Such a terrible thing, tricking poor Grace that way." "News travels fast," Gideon said, not really surprised. This was Medicine Bow, after all. "Well, I hope you will not think me forward," Martha continued, "but I may have a solution for you. My nephew in Cheyenne is looking to expand his freight business into this area. He has been wanting to establish a base in Medicine Bow, but he needs a good blacksmith as part of the operation, someone who can maintain the wagons and shoe the draft horses. It would be a significant contract, worth quite a bit of money." Gideon's interest sharpened. "How much money?" He mentioned he would be willing to pay $1,000 upfront for the right person, to cover the cost of expanding their forge and buying necessary equipment. Then a regular monthly payment after that for ongoing work. "I thought of you immediately, especially given your current situation." $1,000. It would be more than enough to pay off Preston and have money left over, but there was a catch, Gideon was certain. "What exactly would this contract entail?" he asked carefully. "He would need you to work almost exclusively for his freight company for the next 2 years. You could still take other jobs, but his work would have priority. It is a lot of commitment, but the pay is very good. 2 years of being tied to a freight company contract. It would mean less flexibility, less time for other clients, potentially less time to help Grace with the ranch. But it would also mean financial security, the money to get Preston out of their lives once and for all." "Could you arrange a meeting with your nephew?" Gideon asked. "I would like to discuss the details." Martha beamed. "Of course. I will send him a telegram today. He could probably be here within the week." Gideon rode back to the ranch to tell Grace about the potential opportunity. She listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "It is a good opportunity," she said slowly. "The money would solve our immediate problem, and having a steady contract would provide stability for the forge." "But," Gideon prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice, "but 2 years is a long commitment. What if something happens with the ranch, something that requires more of your time and attention? What if we have children and you are tied to this contract? We work it out," Gideon said. "Grace, this is the best solution we have found, and 2 years will pass quickly. We just need to get through this crisis first." Grace nodded, taking a deep breath. "You are right. I am sorry, I am just worried, and it is making me anxious about everything. If you think this contract is a good idea, then pursue it. I trust your judgment." Martha's nephew, a brisk businessman named Carl Sullivan, arrived in Medicine Bow 5 days later. He and Gideon spent an afternoon discussing the terms of the potential contract. Carl needed someone who could maintain a fleet of freight wagons, shoe the draft horses, and provide general metalworking services for his expanding operation. In exchange, he was offering not just the $1,000 upfront payment, but also a guaranteed monthly income for the next 2 years. The terms were fair, even generous. Carl was clearly a man who valued quality work and was willing to pay for it. Gideon negotiated a few minor points, ensuring he would still have some flexibility for emergency work for other clients, particularly for Grace's ranch. Carl agreed readily, and they shook hands on the deal. With the signed contract and the upfront payment in hand, Gideon felt like he could breathe again. He deposited most of the money in the bank in Rawlins, keeping out only what they needed to repay Preston's loan plus interest. 20 days after Preston's ultimatum, Gideon and Grace rode into Medicine Bow together, carrying the full repayment amount in cash. They found Preston at the saloon, looking smug and confident. His expression changed when he saw them walk in with a bank bag. "Mr. Aldridge," Grace said formally, her voice cold, "I am here to repay the loan you made to me in full, including the interest you calculated. $650, I believe you said." She counted out the money on the bar, each bill placed with deliberate precision. Preston's face went through several shades of red as he watched his scheme crumble. "I do not suppose you brought the promissory note," Gideon said. "We will need that back, properly marked as paid in full." Preston fumbled in his jacket, pulling out the folded paper. He marked it as paid with angry, jerky movements, then shoved it across the bar to Grace. She took it, checked that everything was in order, then folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. "Our business is concluded," she said. "I trust you will have no further claims on my property or my assets." "You got lucky," Preston muttered. "Some lucky break that let you come up with the money." "Not luck," Gideon said firmly. "Hard work, good planning, and a community that supports its own. 3 things you would know nothing about." He and Grace walked out of the saloon together, leaving Preston fuming at the bar. Outside, in the bright sunshine of the afternoon, Grace threw her arms around Gideon's neck. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." "We did," Gideon agreed, holding her close. "And now we never have to worry about Preston Aldridge again." They rode back to the ranch together, lighter and happier than they had been in weeks. That evening, they celebrated with a simple dinner, and the satisfaction of knowing their home was secure, their life together protected from the schemes of bitter men. The contract with the Sullivan Freight Company turned out to be excellent for Gideon's business. The steady work and reliable income allowed him to invest in better equipment and to pay his apprentice, Jacob, a proper wage. Word spread about the quality of his work, and even with the freight company taking priority, he had more business than he could handle. Grace's ranch continued to prosper as well. Her horses won recognition at territorial fairs and competitions, and buyers came from farther and farther away to purchase her stock. She expanded her breeding program, adding new bloodlines and improving her already excellent reputation. 2 years into their marriage, Grace discovered she was pregnant. The news came on a crisp autumn morning, and when she told Gideon, his whoop of joy could probably be heard all the way in town. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully, worried he had been too rough. Grace laughed at his concern. "I am pregnant, not made of glass, but yes, we are going to have a baby. In the spring, I think." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Gideon became increasingly protective as Grace's belly grew. She tolerated his hovering with amused patience, continuing to work with her horses right up until the last few weeks. The ranch hands and Jacob, who had become almost part of the family by this point, all pitched in to help with tasks Grace could no longer comfortably manage. Their daughter was born on a bright May morning in 1887, after a labor that left Grace exhausted but triumphant. Gideon held the tiny, squalling baby with trembling hands, overcome with wonder at this new life they had created. "What should we name her?" Grace asked, tired but glowing. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his daughter's red, wrinkled face and surprising amount of dark hair, Gideon thought of his mother who had died when he was a teenager. "What about Hope?" he suggested. "Hope Drake, because she represents everything good we have hoped for and built together." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Hope, yes, that is perfect. Hope Drake proved to be a healthy, happy baby with a set of lungs that could wake the entire ranch. She had Grace's green eyes and Gideon's dark hair, and both parents were completely smitten with her. The ranch hands took turns spoiling her, and even Thomas, who had never been particularly interested in babies, became a devoted honorary uncle. The next few years passed in a blur of hard work, happiness, and the constant chaos of raising a young child. Hope learned to walk in the forge, much to Gideon's terror and Grace's amusement. She learned to ride almost as soon as she could walk, sitting in front of her mother on Grace's gentlest mare. She grew up surrounded by horses and metal, learning both trades as naturally as breathing. When Hope was 3, Grace had a son whom they named Samuel after Gideon's father. Samuel was quieter than his sister, more serious, with Grace's auburn hair and Gideon's steady disposition. 2 years later came another daughter, Elizabeth, who was fearless and adventurous from birth. The Emerson Ranch, which everyone still called it despite Grace now being a Drake, became one of the most successful horse breeding operations in Wyoming. Grace's horses were known throughout the West for their quality, intelligence, and temperament. Gideon's forge remained equally successful, and after his contract with the Sullivan Freight Company ended, he was able to pick and choose his work, focusing on the projects he found most interesting and challenging. They had built something remarkable together, a life that neither could have created alone. The ranch prospered not just because of Grace's skill with horses, but also because of Gideon's ability to keep every piece of equipment in perfect working order, to shoe the horses with meticulous care, to craft custom tools and fixtures that made the operation run smoothly. Similarly, Gideon's forge succeeded not just because of his skill as a blacksmith, but because Grace had the business sense to help him manage the financial side, to negotiate fair prices, to handle the record-keeping that he had always found tedious. They were partners in the truest sense of the word, each bringing their strengths to complement the other's weaknesses, each supporting the other's dreams while building shared ones. When Hope turned 10, she asked her father about the story of how he and Grace had gotten together. They were in the forge together, with Hope learning to shape metal under Gideon's careful supervision. She had shown real aptitude for the work, though Grace thought she might end up more interested in the horses ultimately. "Your mother brought her horse in to be shod," Gideon said simply. "That is it. That is the whole story." Hope sounded disappointed. "Well, she kept bringing horses in to be shod for 6 years. I worked on her animals and we talked, and I fell in love with her a little more each time I saw her. But you did not tell her." "No, I was afraid. I thought she was too extraordinary to ever be interested in someone like me." Hope looked at him skeptically. She had inherited her mother's directness along with her green eyes. "That seems silly. Mother always says you are the best man she knows." "She does." Gideon felt his heart warm at that, even after all these years. "Yes. She says you are the man who saw her for who she was and loved her anyway, who never asked her to be smaller or quieter or different than she wanted to be. She says that is the best kind of love." Gideon had to pause in his work, moved by his daughter's words. "Your mother is a wise woman. So why did you finally tell her? What changed?" She was going to marry someone else, someone who wanted her to give up everything she had built. "I realized that if I did not speak up, I would lose her forever. Sometimes, Hope, you have to be brave enough to risk everything for what you want most. The worst thing you can do is stay silent and wonder what might have been." Hope absorbed this seriously, then went back to shaping the piece of metal she was working on. Gideon smiled to himself, wondering what lessons his daughter would take from his story, what risks she would take in her own life when the time came. The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and challenges common to any family. There were good years and hard years, times of plenty and times when money was tight. There were illnesses and accidents, the inevitable troubles that came with ranch life and raising children. But through it all, Gideon and Grace faced everything together, their love and partnership deepening with each passing season. They had their arguments, their moments of frustration with each other. Grace still got stubborn about her ideas for the ranch, and Gideon could still be inflexible about his methods. But they had learned over the years to talk through their disagreements, to compromise, to remember that they were on the same side, working toward shared goals. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gideon took Grace back to the spot where he had proposed, the meadow on her ranch with the mountains in the distance and the horses grazing peacefully nearby. The children were with Thomas and his wife for the evening, giving them a rare moment of privacy. "I have been thinking," Gideon said, taking her hand, "about that day 10 years ago when you walked into my forge with your mare needing a shoe. If I could go back and talk to that young man I was then, I would tell him not to wait. I would tell him to speak up sooner, to be braver." Grace smiled, leaning into him. "But if you had done that, our story would be different. We would have lost all those years of friendship, of learning each other in that particular way. I do not think I would change anything, Gideon. Even the years of not knowing, of hoping and waiting and wondering, those years made us who we are now. They made us appreciate what we have." "You really think that?" Gideon asked. "You do not regret the time we lost?" "I think we did not lose anything," Grace said firmly. "We were building a foundation. Yes, we could have been together sooner, but we also might not have worked out if we had rushed into things. The timing was right when it happened, even if it felt late. We got our happy ending, Gideon. We got everything we wanted and more." Gideon pulled her close, kissing her with all the love and gratitude he felt. She was right, he realized. They had gotten their happy ending, and it was still ongoing, still being written with each day they spent together. "I love you," he said against her hair. "I will love you until the day I die, and probably beyond that." "I love you too," Grace replied. "My quiet blacksmith who finally found his voice." As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, they stood together in the place where they had started this chapter of their lives, grateful for every moment that had brought them here, excited for every moment still to come. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By the time Hope was 15, she was handling many of the breeding decisions herself, showing an instinctive understanding of bloodlines and conformation that rivaled her mother's. Samuel, now 12, had proven to have his father's gift for metalwork and was spending most of his time in the forge. Elizabeth, just turned 10, was still deciding where her passions lay, but she showed promise with both horses and metal. Gideon and Grace began to talk about the future, about what would happen when they were too old to run the ranch and forge themselves. They wanted to keep everything in the family if possible, to pass on the legacy they had built to their children. But they also wanted their children to have choices, to not feel obligated to continue if they dreamed of something different. "Whatever they choose," Grace said, "I hope they find what we found. Partners who love and respect them, work that fulfills them, a life that is truly theirs." "They will," Gideon said confidently. "We are raising them right. They will know what matters." When Preston Aldridge died in Denver in 1892, neither Gideon nor Grace felt any particular emotion at the news. He had been a footnote in their story, a challenge they had overcome together. His passing was simply confirmation that that chapter was well and truly closed. The turn of the century brought changes to Wyoming and to Medicine Bow. The town grew larger, more settled, as the wildness of the early territorial days faded into something more civilized. The railroad expanded, bringing more commerce and more people. Gideon and Grace watched these changes with mixed feelings, nostalgic for the simpler times but also grateful for the opportunities the growth brought. By 1905, Gideon was 51 and Grace was 47. Hope, now 18 and a stunning young woman, was running much of the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Samuel at 15 was becoming a master blacksmith in his own right, and Elizabeth at 13 was showing interest in the business side of both operations, with a head for numbers that exceeded either parent. Gideon and Grace, while still active and healthy, began to step back slightly, letting their children take on more responsibility. They had worked hard for decades and had earned the right to slow down a little, to enjoy the fruits of their labor. On a warm summer evening, they sat together on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the pastures where their horses grazed. Hope was working with a young colt in the corral, her movements sure and confident. Samuel was still in the forge, finishing up a project. Elizabeth was in the house, updating the ranch's financial records. "We did well," Grace said softly, taking Gideon's hand. "We did," he agreed. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I am, that you loved me back, that we built all this together." "It was not luck," Grace said. "It was choice. We chose each other every day, even before we were together. You chose to care about my horses, to do your best work for me. I chose to keep coming back to your forge, to trust you with my most valuable assets. We chose to finally speak up about our feelings. We chose to fight for this ranch when Preston tried to take it. We chose to work together to support each other to build this life. Every bit of it was choice." Gideon thought about that, about all the choices large and small that had brought them to this moment. She was right. Love was not just something that happened to you. It was something you chose again and again through your actions and your words and your commitment. "Then I choose you," he said, lifting her hand to his lips. "Today and every day for the rest of our lives, I will never stop choosing you, Grace." "And I choose you," she replied, her eyes bright with emotion. "My quiet blacksmith who learned to speak his heart, I will never stop choosing you either." They sat together as the stars came out, comfortable in the silence that had always been part of their relationship. It was a silence born not of uncertainty or fear, but of deep understanding and contentment. They had said everything that needed to be said, and now they could simply be together, secure in their love and their life. The years continued their steady march. Hope married a young rancher from near Laramie when she was 21, a good man who respected her skills and ambitions. They bought land adjacent to the Emerson Ranch and began their own breeding program, working closely with Grace to ensure the bloodlines remained strong. Samuel took over the forge completely when he was 20, allowing Gideon to truly retire, though the older man still spent time in the shop, unable to completely give up the work he loved. Elizabeth went to college in Cheyenne, studying business and accounting, then returned to Medicine Bow to help manage both the ranch and the forge operations, applying modern business practices that increased profits significantly. Gideon and Grace became grandparents, then grandparents several times over. Hope had 3 children, Samuel 2, and Elizabeth eventually married and had 4. The ranch that Grace had built became a true family operation, with children and grandchildren all contributing in various ways. Through it all, Gideon and Grace remained partners, best friends, lovers. They grew old together, their hair turning white, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp. They took daily walks around the ranch, pointing out changes and remembering the early days. They sat together on the porch every evening, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes Gideon still worked in the forge, usually on special projects for the grandchildren. He made each one a piece of jewelry as they came of age, just as he had made Grace's wedding ring all those years ago. Each piece was unique, crafted with love and skill, a tangible reminder of the importance of choosing work you could be proud of. Grace still advised on breeding decisions and occasionally worked with the horses herself, though she left most of the physical work to younger generations. Her expertise was legendary, and people came from hundreds of miles away to consult with her about bloodlines and breeding programs. In the summer of 1920, on their 36th wedding anniversary, Gideon and Grace celebrated surrounded by their children and grandchildren. It was a beautiful day, warm and clear, with the Wyoming mountains standing eternal in the distance. There was food and music and laughter, the kind of joyful chaos that came with a large, loving family. As the sun began to set, Gideon found Grace standing alone for a moment, looking out over the ranch. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Grace said softly. "All of it. The day I rode into Medicine Bow for the first time, so determined to make my father's dream work. The first time you shod my mare. All those years of bringing my horses to you, hoping you would say something. The day you finally did. Our wedding, our children, this ranch, this life. All of it." "Any regrets?" Gideon asked. Grace turned in his arms so she could look at him directly. Even at 62, with silver in her hair and lines on her face, she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "This has been the life I wanted. You are the partner I dreamed of. I would not change a thing." "Neither would I," Gideon said, his voice thick with emotion. "Except maybe I would have told you I loved you sooner, saved us both some time." Grace smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart decades ago. "We had all the time we needed. We had a whole lifetime together, and it has been perfect." They kissed as the sun set, surrounded by the sound of their family, on the land they had built together through love and partnership and sheer determination. It was a perfect moment, the kind that makes a whole life worthwhile. Gideon Drake lived to be 87 years old, and Grace Emerson Drake lived to be 85. They spent 52 years married, partners in every sense of the word. When Gideon died peacefully in his sleep in 1941, Grace held his hand and whispered that she would see him again soon. She followed him less than a year later, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of whom had benefited from the love story she and Gideon had written together. The Emerson Ranch is still in operation today, still breeding exceptional horses, still bearing the mark of the woman who built it and the man who loved her. And if you visit Medicine Bow, Wyoming, you can still see the forge where Gideon Drake worked, preserved now as a historical site. There is a plaque that tells the story of the quiet blacksmith who shod horses for years, never daring to say he loved the woman who owned them, until finally he found his courage and his voice. It is a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the best things in life are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth choosing again and again, every single day. It is a reminder that true partnership is built on respect and friendship as much as romance, that love is as much about action as emotion, that the quiet moments matter just as much as the grand gestures. And it is a testament to the truth that it is never too late to speak your heart, never too late to take a risk on love, never too late to build the life you dream of with the person you choose to share it with. Gideon and Grace proved that, in the dusty town of Medicine Bow, Wyoming, in the fading days of the Wild West, when a blacksmith finally told a horse breeder what he had been feeling for 6 long years, and she told him she had been feeling the same way all along. Their story became legend in Medicine Bow, told and retold through generations. Young people heard about the quiet blacksmith and the independent rancher who built an empire together. And they learned that love is patient, that timing matters, that sometimes the best relationships are the ones built on years of friendship and mutual respect before they ever become romantic. The house where Gideon and Grace raised their children still stands on the Emerson Ranch, maintained by their descendants. Inside, you can still see Grace's collection of books on horse breeding, Gideon's carefully maintained ledgers from the forge, photographs of their family spanning decades. And on Grace's dresser, carefully preserved under glass, is the iron and silver ring that Gideon forged with his own hands, the ring that symbolized a blacksmith's love for a woman who taught him that sometimes the most important words are the ones you are most afraid to say.